Here's a potential draft for your introduction. The late afternoon sun filtered through the big glass windows of a small gift shop on a quiet street in New York City. Inside, a young boy, no older than 10, stood in front of a shelf lined with delicate figurines, clutching a few crumpled dollar bills in his hand. His face was a mix of concentration and worry as his eyes scanned the shelf for something special. Today wasn't just any day, it was his mother's birthday. And although money was tight, he was determined to find her the perfect gift, one that would make her smile despite the challenges they had been facing as a family. The shop was warm and inviting, with the faint scent of cinnamon lingering in the air and soft jazz playing from an old radio behind the counter. It was the kind of place where every item seemed to tell a story, from the hand-painted teacups to the little snow globes that glittered under the soft lighting. The boy's sneakers squeaked faintly on the wooden floor as he moved from shelf to shelf, picking up a small vase and then a box of scented candles, only to put them back down again. He didn't want something ordinary, he wanted something meaningful. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the bills he had saved from odd chores around the neighborhood. It wasn't much, barely enough for anything fancy, but he had his heart set on finding something that would show his mom just how much he appreciated everything she did. She worked long hours at a diner, always coming home with tired eyes but a warm hug for him. She deserved something beautiful, something she'd never expect. As he deliberated between a tiny music box and a silver pendant with a delicate heart-shaped charm, the faint chime of the shop's doorbell rang out. The boy didn't look up right away, too focused on his decision, but he noticed a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The shopkeeper, who had been quietly rearranging a display near the counter, straightened up and adjusted his tie, his movements becoming more deliberate. A presence filled the room, not loud or commanding, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't until the boy glanced sideways that he noticed the tall figure who had just entered the shop. Dressed in a crisp blazer and polished shoes, the young man looked to be only a few years older than the boy's teenage brother. His face was strikingly familiar, the kind you'd seen on TV or in magazines, yet he carried himself with an easy grace, like he didn't care about the attention he often got. It was Barron Trump. The boy's eyes widened slightly. He wasn't sure why someone like Barron Trump would be here, in this little corner shop that seemed far removed from the world of wealth and privilege. Barron's expression was calm, almost guarded, as he glanced around the store, his gaze briefly meeting the boy's. There was a moment of stillness, as if the two of them were the only ones who noticed something unspoken in the other. Barron began to browse the shelves, his movements unhurried yet purposeful. The shopkeeper's demeanor had shifted completely. He now watched Barron out of the corner of his eye, his polite smile never wavering. The young boy, however, couldn't help but feel a mixture of curiosity and self-consciousness. He wondered if Barron was here for someone important, someone whose birthday might also be today. But why this shop? And why now? The boy shook off his thoughts and turned back to the music box, running his fingers over the smooth wood. It played a soft tune when opened, one that reminded him of the lullabies his mom used to hum when he was little. It felt just right, but as he glanced at the price tag, his heart sank. It was more than he could afford. He hesitated, biting his lip, unsure of what to do next. Meanwhile, Barron had picked up a small globe from a nearby shelf. He examined it with the same care the boy had shown for the music box, as if the item in his hand held more meaning than its price tag or appearance suggested. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, he spoke. "Looking for something special?" The boy froze, startled by the question. He looked up to see Barron watching him, his expression calm, but with a hint of genuine curiosity. The boy nodded hesitantly, unsure how to respond. Barron stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance, and glanced at the music box in the boy's hand. "That's a good choice," Barron said, his voice steady but kind. "It looks like it would mean a lot to someone." The boy felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know why Barron Trump was talking to him or why his words carried such weight, but he nodded again, feeling a strange sense of reassurance. For a moment, it felt like the difference in their worlds didn't matter. They were just two people, standing in the same shop, looking for ways to make someone else happy. But then, as if the universe itself had decided to make this moment even more surreal, something happened that neither of them could have anticipated. The shopkeeper cleared his throat, stepping forward with a look of hesitant urgency. "Excuse me, young man," he said, addressing Barron. "I couldn't help but notice. I believe this might interest you." He held out a small, intricately carved box that had been hidden behind the counter, its surface gleaming under the soft light. Barron's eyes narrowed slightly as he took the box, opening it to reveal something inside that made his expression shift, something almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest that this was no ordinary item. The young boy watched silently, torn between his own worries and the growing mystery unfolding before him. What was in the box? And why did it seem to matter so much to Barron? The room felt charged, as if something extraordinary was about to happen, and just as the boy was about to turn back to his own decision, Barron looked at him again, his expression unreadable but filled with intent. "You know," Barron said quietly, holding the box in one hand while gesturing toward the music box in the boy's. "Sometimes the right gift finds you. You just have to trust it." The boy's heart raced, unsure of what to say or do. And in that moment, as the two of them stood there in the middle of the little gift shop, the air thick with unspoken possibilities, it became clear that this chance encounter was about to change everything. The boy stared at Barron, unsure if he had heard him correctly. There was something in Barron's tone, not bossy or condescending, but thoughtful, almost like he knew something the boy didn't. For a moment, the boy wondered if Barron had ever been in a situation like his, carefully counting every dollar, worrying if it would be enough. Probably not. Yet here they were, standing on equal ground in this tiny shop, surrounded by trinkets and treasures that held meaning far beyond their price tags. The boy nodded quietly, gripping the music box a little tighter. I think this one's right," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Barron studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good choice," he said again, his tone encouraging. He turned back to the carved box in his hand, running his fingers along its edge as if weighing a decision of his own. The shopkeeper, still lingering nearby, watched them both with a mix of curiosity and polite detachment, though his eyes occasionally darted toward the clock on the wall. The boy glanced down at the money in his hand, anxiety creeping in again. Even with everything he'd saved, he wasn't sure he could afford the music box. But before he could think too much about it, Barron spoke again, his voice calm and steady. "Who's it for?" he asked, his question simple but sincere. "My mom," the boy replied, a little hesitant but feeling an odd sense of comfort in Barron's presence. "It's her birthday. I wanted to get her something special." Barron's expression softened, and for a moment he seemed far removed from the world of headlines and cameras that often surrounded him. "She must be pretty amazing," he said. "She is," the boy said, his voice firmer now. "She works so hard. She never does anything for herself, but she's always there for me. I just want her to know that I notice, that I care." Barron's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes but carried a hint of understanding. "I get it," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "Sometimes it's the little things that matter the most." Before the boy could respond, the shopkeeper cleared his throat again, drawing their attention. "If you've both found what you're looking for, I can ring you up," he said, his voice polite but firm, as though trying to move things along. The boy hesitated, clutching the music box tightly as he shuffled toward the counter. His heart sank when the shopkeeper gave him the total. It was more than he had, even with every penny he'd brought. He stood there, unsure of what to do, embarrassment creeping up his neck. He could feel Barron watching him, though he didn't dare look up. For a moment, silence filled the shop, broken only by the faint hum of the jazz playing in the background. Then, Barron stepped forward, placing the carved box he'd been holding onto the counter. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black wallet. The boy's eyes widened as Barron handed over a card, his actions calm and deliberate. "Add the music box," Barron said simply, his voice leaving no room for argument. The boy's mouth opened in protest. "No, I can't let you." "It's not a big deal," Barron interrupted gently, turning to him with a small, reassuring smile. "Think of it as a birthday present for your mom." The boy stared at him, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over him. He didn't know what to say. No one had ever done something like this for him before. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Barron nodded, his expression unreadable. The shopkeeper quickly completed the transaction, sliding the bagged items across the counter. Barron picked up the carved box, giving the boy a small nod before heading toward the door. But just as he reached it, he paused and turned back. "You remind me of someone," Barron said, his tone thoughtful. "Someone who cared more about making others happy than himself. Don't lose that. It's rare." The boy didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, clutching the bag with the music box tightly as Barron walked out into the fading light of the evening. For a moment, the boy stood there, the events of the last few minutes feeling almost surreal. But something about Barron's words lingered, echoing in his mind. Who had he reminded Barron of? And why had Barron gone out of his way to help him? The boy stepped outside, the cool air brushing against his face as he watched Barron disappear into a sleek black car parked at the curb. A part of him wanted to call out, to ask for answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he turned and began walking home, the music box clutched in his hands like a treasure. As he made his way through the quiet streets, a strange sense of hope filled him, mingled with curiosity about the encounter he'd just experienced. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this chance meeting, was only the beginning of a story far bigger than he could have imagined. Something had shifted, not just in his world, but in Barron's too. And whatever lay ahead, their paths were now connected in ways neither of them could fully understand. The boy quickened his pace, eager to get home and give his mom her gift, unaware that the events of this day would soon ripple far beyond the walls of their small apartment, drawing others into a story that was just beginning to unfold. As the boy reached the door of his apartment, his heart raced with anticipation. The music box felt heavier in his hands, not because of its weight, but because of the meaning it now carried. He turned the key, stepping inside to find his mom sitting on the worn-out couch, her hair pulled back and her uniform still on after a long shift. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that could light up the darkest of days. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice warm but tired. "How was your day?" The boy hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain everything that had happened. Instead, he simply held out the neatly wrapped bag. "Happy birthday, Mom." Her eyes widened, and she looked at the bag, then back at him. "You didn't have to," she began, but he shook his head. "Just open it," he said, unable to hide his excitement. Carefully, she unwrapped the paper and lifted the music box out of the bag. Her fingers traced the smooth wood as she opened it, letting the soft melody fill the room. Her eyes glistened as she listened, and for a moment, it seemed like all the exhaustion she carried melted away. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The boy grinned, feeling a wave of pride and relief. "I wanted you to have something special," he said, "because you're always taking care of me, and I wanted you to know how much I love you." She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as the music played on. "I don't need anything else," she said softly. "This is perfect. You're perfect." As they sat together, the boy thought back to the shop, to Barron Trump's unexpected kindness and the strange connection they'd shared. He didn't understand why someone like Barron had chosen to help him, but he felt grateful. It wasn't just about the gift. Barron's gesture had reminded him that there was good in the world, even in the most unexpected places. Meanwhile, across the city, Barron sat in the back of the sleek black car, the carved box resting on his lap. Inside was a small, engraved pocket watch, a gift for someone he rarely spoke about but thought of often. He turned the watch over in his hands, lost in thought. Meeting the boy had stirred something in him, a memory of his own childhood, of simpler times before the weight of expectations had shaped his life. The car pulled up to his destination, and he stepped out, the box in hand. As he walked up the grand stone steps, he couldn't help but wonder if their paths would ever cross again. But even if they didn't, he hoped the boy would hold on to his sense of kindness and determination. Back at the apartment, the boy sat with his mom, the music box still playing its soft tune. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, everything felt right. The memory of Barron's words stayed with him, a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. The world outside continued on, busy and chaotic, but in that small apartment there was peace, and in two very different lives, bound together by a fleeting moment in a tiny gift shop, the ripples of that day carried forward, a reminder that even in the most unexpected encounters, there is the power to create something meaningful and lasting.